Today we are continuing our message series from Ruts to Revival. And the next part of this that we're talking about is routine. And we saw last week how ruts in life can keep you from reaching your promise. We looked into Deuteronomy 1 where the children of Israel were stuck in a rut after 40 years of wandering the wilderness. They had not inherited their promise yet, and they were not headed in the right direction. They actually had to do that until an entire generation of people died off that left Egypt, with the exception of the two. But they had become satisfied in their rut around Mount Horeb, or Mount Sinai, as it's called in other passages. And they were comfortable staying where they were instead of going into the promised land. But God spoke to them and said, "You have stayed around this mountain long enough." And that was a word for somebody last week. You stayed in that rut long enough, and it's time to get out. We saw how developing the proper spiritual disciplines can help get out of the rut. We looked into Matthew chapter 6, where Jesus speaks of 3 spiritual disciplines when he said, when you give, when you pray, and when you fast. And I mentioned just kind of in passing that I felt like we needed to do a more in-depth look at fasting, and I am. We're going to do that in a couple of weeks. We're going to look into fasting. And some people are like, oh, he's preaching on fasting. I don't want to give up meals. I need meals. If I can give up meals, you can give up meals. If I can fast something, because it's not always times that I fast food. Sometimes I fast other things. Which it's also, you shouldn't fast sin, because you shouldn't do sin to begin with. So don't. I am not going to cheat on my spouse anymore during this fast. No, that's not how that works. But that's for a few weeks down the road. But Jesus did not say if. He said when you give, when you pray, when you fast. And today we're going to look a little bit deeper into things like that, but we're going to talk about routine. So tonight's the Super Bowl, and I don't have a favorite team in it. I am pulling for the Rams tonight because I've always kind of liked Matthew Stafford, even when he was playing for Georgia. I don't like Georgia, but I liked that. I see there's a couple Georgia fans in the house, I know. I was actually surprised Michael Brown wasn't wearing some kind of Georgia because they're national champions. I've always kind of liked him, and I like that he has an opportunity now with a new team. So there's a good story with the Bengals, too. They haven't been there in years, and they became known as the Cincinnati Bungles, and I have a lot of friends from Cincinnati. So I just really want a good game tonight. But it's the biggest football game of the year, and it is the most watched event on television every year. It's the highest rated event on television. And some of you are going to watch to cheer on a team. You're going to watch because you want one specific team to win. Some will watch because they want a team to lose. Some will watch because of the commercials. And I've heard a lot, some are watching because you want to see the halftime show. If you're somewhere around my age, then that halftime show is from your childhood or from your high school years. A lot of those people, and I've had a lot of people tell me they can't wait to see that. Some of you are like, I really couldn't care less. I'm not even going to watch it. There's something else on, I'm going to watch that. So there's just other reasons why people will watch it. But I wanted to use the game as an example this morning. In order for these teams to make it to the biggest football game of their lives, they had to develop routines. They had to develop healthy routines. Now, one of my favorite football players of all time is NFL Hall of Fame wide receiver Jerry Rice. Does anybody remember when he played? He was a phenomenal football player. And there's a quote. I think I've got the thing up there. Yeah. This is a quote about his routine. In team workouts, he was famous for his hustle. While many receivers would trot back to the quarterback after catching a pass, Rice would sprint to the end zone after each reception. He would typically continue practicing long after the rest of the team had gone home. Most remarkable were his 6 days a week off-season workouts, which he conducted entirely on his own. Mornings were devoted to cardiovascular work, running a hilly 5-mile trail. He would then run 10 40-meter wind sprints up the steepest part of that trail. In the afternoons, he did equally strenuous weight training. Those workouts became legendary as the most demanding in the league. And other players would sometimes join Rice just to see what it was like. Some of them got sick before the day was over. He was dedicated. He was someone who worked hard and went at it hard developing this routine. His routine created muscle memory. In our time together at the men's breakfast yesterday morning, Dennis Childress made a comment about how, going basically about a routine and how you gain muscle memory so that when you're in the battle, when you're in different situations, you automatically know what to do. You just kick right into it because that's where your muscle memory goes. And that's kind of what spiritual disciplines, how that works. With Jerry Rice, he had so much muscle memory, he had so much routine about what he had done that when he was in a game, he didn't have to think. He didn't have to count 10 yards before he made his cut. He didn't have to wonder. When it happened, he went out on the field, did it, and when he turned, the ball was already there because he had a really great quarterback throwing to him. So it was a workout routine that became so ingrained in muscle memory that when he was on the field of play, it just came natural. The men playing in the game tonight have their own routines. There's occasionally some missed assignments in this big of a game, but in order to make it to the Super Bowl, their routines have to have been long established. Routines lead to success in the natural world, but we need routine in our spiritual lives as well. Last week we saw how spiritual disciplines can get us out of the rut if we cling to the things that God has given us, if we are faithful in giving, faithful in prayer, faithful in worship, faithful in fasting. And we are creatures of routine, and by developing these routines, it helps pull us out of the rut and onto the road to revival. Because that's this big thing, from ruts to revival. And all the things in between are how we can get on that road. Personal revival that begins here in the heart, and then it spreads into your families, into this church, into the community, and around the world. So we're creatures of routine. Every day there's certain routines that you repeat. Whether you realize it or not, there are certain routines that you go through every day. I wake up on the same side of the bed. Every day when I get up and I roll out of bed, it's the same foot that hits the floor first. It's my left foot. I sleep on that side of the bed, so as I roll out, my left foot hits the floor first. When I brush my teeth, it's routine. I brush my teeth the same way every time. And I actually stopped to think about it one time, and it would be... people would probably laugh if they saw how I brush my teeth, not just with but I don't know what to do with my left hand when I'm brushing my teeth. So I'm brushing my teeth, and my left hand, I generally just have it in a fist with the Superman pose on this side. So I'm brushing my teeth like this, and one day when I finally noticed it, I'm like, stare off into the distance. But that's my routine. If I mess it up, if I choose to do something else with my left hand when I'm brushing my teeth, it doesn't feel right. And most of you have a similar routine. When you put your pants on, you put the same leg in first every time. You may not have realized that, but notice it next time and then switch it the time after that and see how weird it feels. Same thing, like I typically will put on socks and shoes in the same order. It's routine. Routines and ruts are not the same thing, though. Ruts prevent you from reaching your promise. Routines keep you moving. Even when you don't feel like moving, a routine will help propel you forward. My daily routine helps me, keeps me going and keeps me out of the ruts. And ruts can become monotonous. They can become mundane at times. But they're necessary for our success. And I want us to look at someone in the Word today who had routines. And not only did this routine that he had keep his life together, but in a very important time, his routine delivered him out of the face of death. And that's Daniel. We see Daniel in the beginning of the book with his name. He was taken captive along with a lot of other people, but it specifically names him and his 3 friends were taken captive by the Babylonians, and they were taken because they were the best and the brightest. And the way that the reason that they did that was to bring back the best of the best and brainwash them to serve in the Babylonian Empire, assimilating the best of the Hebrew culture with the Babylonian culture, because they would acknowledge, okay, well, obviously this group of people have some kind of blessing. They have Solomon, the most wealthy man ever, and they have all this gold in this temple that the Babylonians had come in, so there's all this culture that the Babylonians wanted. and they just took the best and brightest to assimilate them into the Babylonian and kind of merge the Babylonian and Jewish cultures. The problem is that the customs and the traditions of the Babylonians didn't line up with Daniel's faith. Last week I told you about how spiritual disciplines will get you out of the rut, and spiritual disciplines are where Daniel excelled. That's something that he was very strong in. His spiritual routine brought him closer to God and helped make him more in the image of God. So the Babylonians, they had their way of doing things, and he and his friends were assigned these roles, and one of the things that the king wanted to do, and the culture was, you're going to eat the best of the food and wine. You're going to have the choice meats and everything. And they were doing this, what they considered was the best for the Hebrews. They looked at this as, this is the best we have, so we're going to give it to them. And that's a message for another time, that sometimes the enemy will keep you captive with the things that you think are the best. However, that's not what they were wanting. Daniel, it was not kosher to Daniel's faith. He couldn't eat it. So he convinced the leaders to allow him, all we're going to have is fruit and vegetables and water for the next 10 days. And the Bible says that after 10 days, they looked better than all the others who were forced to eat the king's meat and drink his wine. So they were forced. I mean, I'm sure most of them were like, especially if it's something that they didn't get at home, and they got a big old steak. I had one of those recently. It was that big, and it was amazing. They were not as healthy as Daniel and his three friends, who chose to stick by the diet that they had, and they were more healthy. So because of that, these four men, they stuck to their routine, they were better off, and as a result, they were promoted within the kingdom. So picking it up in chapter 6, this is after they've been promoted. So that was the setup leading all the way to chapter 6, and here's where we're going to have the bulk of our text. It's a lengthy text, so you can follow along on the screen. It seemed good to Darius to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom, that they would be in charge of the whole kingdom, and over them 3 commissioners, of whom Daniel was one, that these satraps might be accountable to them, and that the king might not suffer loss. Then this Daniel began distinguishing himself among the commissioners and satraps because he possessed an extraordinary spirit, and the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom. So not only did he gain favor in chapter 1, he is increasing in favor everything he puts his hand to. Then the commissioners and satraps began trying to find a ground of accusation against Daniel in regard to government affairs, but they could find no ground of accusation or evidence of corruption, inasmuch as he was faithful, and no negligence or corruption was to be found in him. Then these men said, "We will not find any ground of accusation against Daniel unless we find it against him with regard to the law of his God." Man, that's something to be known for. We can't trip him up on anything unless it's something to do with his God. He was known because of his faith and his strength and his spiritual discipline. Then these commissioners and satraps, verse 6, came by agreement to the king and spoke to him as follows: "King Darius, live forever. All the commissioners of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the high officials and the governors have consulted together that the king should establish a statute and enforce an injunction that anyone who makes a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days shall be cast into the lion's den. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it may not be changed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which may not be revoked." Therefore, King Darius signed the document, that is, the injunction. Now when Daniel, verse 10, when Daniel knew that the document was signed, he entered his house. Now in his roof chamber he had windows open toward Jerusalem. And he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God, as he had been doing previously. These men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and supplication before his God. Then they approached and spoke before the king about the king's injunction. "Did you not sign an injunction that any man who makes petition to any god besides you, O king, for 30 days would be cast into the lion's den?" Now they did this before, and they're bringing it back again. You see, Darius wasn't Babylonian. Darius was a king that came later after Babylonians were overthrown. And now it's the Medo-Persian Empire that's ruling. So Daniel had favor with the previous administration. Now he's gaining favor with this administration. The other people don't like it, so they appeal to the king's vanity and his authority. Did you not sign an injunction, O king, that anybody who does this will be cast into the lion's den? The king replied, the statement is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which may not be revoked. Then they answered and spoke before the king. Daniel, who's one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction which you signed, but keeps making his petition 3 times a day. Then as soon as the king heard this statement, he was deeply distressed and set his mind on delivering Daniel. And even until sunset, he kept exerting himself to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, recognize, O king, that this is the law of the Medes and Persians, that no injunction or statute which king establishes may be changed, using his own words against him. Verse 16, then the king gave orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. The king spoke to Daniel and said to Daniel, your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself deliver you. Daniel, he was a hard worker. He was good at what he did. That's why Darius liked him. Nebuchadnezzar noticed it. Now Darius is noticing it. He's being promoted. His promotion caused jealousy. You may have experienced something similar in your life. Whenever you start to experience the favor and the blessing of God, whenever God is pouring more and more blessing into your life, people might look at that, and that's when the haters start to come in. So the king couldn't change what he had written into law, because that would mean admitting that he had made a mistake. And the king never makes mistakes. I can't do that. I didn't make a mistake. I mean, they might have talked me into a corner here, but there was no way that he could go against his word. So we're going to look today for the next few minutes at 3 routines about Daniel's life that every Christ follower needs. So there was no other choice than to throw Daniel into the lion's den, but Daniel was protected, and we'll see that how in just a second. But these 3 things are part of his routine that every believer in Jesus needs. The first one, Daniel had routine in his posture. He had routine in his posture. Verse 3 says that an excellent spirit was in him. Thinking about that, everything that Daniel did, he did the best. Everything that he put his hand to, it was not a halfway effort. It was not, I'm begrudgingly do this. I talked earlier about sacrifice of praise. It wasn't like that. It wasn't, oh man, I really don't want to do this, but I guess I'll do it anyway. He did everything he did the best of his ability. And he had a good attitude about it. You ever met anybody that just has a bad attitude about life? They make a good day turn bad. They never seem happy. There's always just something right there to complain about. Well, in Nehemiah, the Bible says that the joy of the Lord is our strength. And we need to live life like we know this. That's how Daniel approached this. He knew that the joy of the Lord was his strength. And Nehemiah hadn't even happened yet. Yet he lived his life as the joy of the Lord being his strength. He had an excellent spirit inside him. And even though people were out to destroy him, even though others were jealous, they were trying to tear down what God was doing in his life, he held on to his faith, and he practiced it through his routine. He had his posture, his routine. One of the greatest characteristics of godliness in people's lives are when they can face trials. And they can remain steadfast. They can remain unwavering. Whatever happens, it's not going to bother me. I am going to stand firm because I have this routine, because I connect to God on a daily basis, because God speaks into me. He pours into me. Even though the storms come, they have faith. Psalm 46, verses 1 through 3. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear. Though the earth should change and the mountains slip into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains quake at its swelling pride. In other words, no matter what else happens, these amazing things that are listed in this passage. The earth change, mountains slip into the sea, waters roar, mountains quake. No matter what we face, we still believe. We find our strength in God. We have to have routine in our posture. The next thing, Daniel had routine in his purity. He had routine in his posture, and he had routine in his purity. Some of the highest ranking officials in the kingdom were out to ruin his reputation, but they couldn't find one accusation. They could not find one thing to pin on him. They were looking, they said that he was a man of integrity, even with his governmental work. They were trying to see if there was some way that he messed up, and even so far as corruption or unfaithfulness or negligence. There was no dirt on Daniel's life. Verse 4 said it this way. Then the commissioners and satraps began trying to find a ground of accusation against Daniel in regard to government affairs, but they could find no ground of accusation or evidence of corruption, inasmuch as he was faithful. No negligence or corruption was found in him. He was a man that led with integrity. Everything that he did, they couldn't come against him and say, oh yeah, well you did this over here. Look, I look at Daniel and man, I'm convicted because I can't say that about me. I hope there are other people that can look at that and say, man, I strive for that. And I say that not living in my failure. God is transforming me from glory to glory. So as long as I'm a better person than I was 5 years ago, I'm headed in the right direction. So they couldn't find anything. And this is the guy you really want in holding government office. This is the guy that you want leading things. They couldn't find anything wrong. He was above reproach. The only way that they could do it was to have something about him against his faith, against his beliefs. They used his spiritual disciplines against him. And as they begin to discuss it, I can just picture it. This isn't in the text, but I'm just kind of, if it was in our modern vernacular and culture, we've got him. That's it, we've got him. No, he is a man of integrity, so we cannot do anything. No one will believe that he was stealing. No one will believe that he was negligent because he's way too good of an example. But he will not waver in his routine. And they couldn't find difficulty. And that's something, they couldn't find anything wrong with him. And that's something that I look at here for a second. And I stop and I'm like, wow, Daniel, he almost seems perfect. And here's an encouragement for you. There was only one perfect person ever to live, and it wasn't Daniel. Jesus was the only sinless man ever to live. So that means at some point in Daniel's life, he was not this person. And that should give you hope to know that no matter what has happened in your past, sometimes God may take and move you. Sometimes God may set up a situation where you're somewhere away from where you thought you were supposed to be, somewhere away from your homeland, and then he begins to bless you, and he took you out of a certain situation and put you somewhere else that nobody else knows your past. No one can hold your past against you because God has placed you in this situation over here where he can perfectly set you up to be what he has called you to be. Daniel had a past, but nobody knew it. Live in the confidence of who Christ has created you to be, who he has molded you into his image and you're becoming. Once you've invited Jesus to be Lord of your life, all of the sin, all of the failure that you experience is in your past. It's under the blood of Jesus. If you've repented of your sin, then it's under the blood of Jesus, and it's no longer who you are. The writer of Hebrews said it this way in chapter 10, verse 17. And their sins and their lawless deeds I will remember no more. That's a promise to us. God won't remember your past sins, and that gives you freedom to walk into the future. Now remember, we're dying to self here. From the beginning of the year, this is about dying to self. It's not about uplifting our own selves and lowering God. God is the focus. So Daniel had a way of doing this, a way of staying humble. His routine, his daily devotion time and praying towards Jerusalem kept him humble and also empowered him to be excellent in the things that he did. So he had routine in his posture, he had routine in his purity, and he had routine, the third thing, he had routine in his performance. He did the same thing every day, no matter what. He had routine in his performance. He would go home, he would open the windows, toward Jerusalem, he would get down on his knees and pray. He would give thanks to God. He did this 3 times every day. 3 times every day. Now, whether or not that's a routine that you would do is to pray 3 times a day in the same way. I'm not putting shackles on it saying that you have to do exactly what Daniel did. This is bigger picture about establishing a routine prayer life, about establishing something that you can hold on to. And I get it. Sometimes routines can get old. Whether you're trying to apply whenever you're trying to apply a spiritual discipline in your life, there are things that keep demanding your attention and they demand your time. It's the ADD prayer that happens. It happens with me, and I get ready to pray, and you start thinking about all the stuff that needs to be done. Maybe you're at the house and you're trying to get into a prayer routine, and you realize that laundry needs to be done. Or the lawn needs to be mowed, or the kitchen needs to be cleaned. There's work stuff that's got to be done. Homework needs to be finished. There's so many things that will creep in and try to get you out of your routine and out of what's going on. But when you set a spiritual discipline, you're saying, no, I'm not going to change this no matter what. We're trying to live lives in the example that Daniel gave us. Nobody is throwing us to the lions if we do what we say we're going to do. So it should be so much easier and freer to do that and lock that in, that we have a specific time, a routine that we pray and we get a hold of God. Maybe it's when you get up in the morning, the first thing out of your mouth is not, oh man, my back hurts. Maybe the first thing out of your mouth needs to be praise the Lord for another day. And you begin to develop that routine, and the first fruits of your lips are praise to God. Then you begin to read the Word in the morning. I used to read the Word in the evening, and this was years ago, because I was not a morning person. Well, now I get up way earlier than I would like to. I can't sleep in anymore. So what happens? God has changed my routine such that He has provided space for me and Him to have time together in the mornings for prayer, for reading, for times to connect with Him. So Daniel heard about this new law, and he went home, and he did the same thing that he did every single day. He did not allow it to stop him from the calling that God had placed, from the commitment that he had that was strengthening him and life-giving to him, was his daily prayer routine. Even though he had experienced promotion and success, Daniel was in a foreign land, and he needed God's presence in his life every day. Daniel was in a foreign land, and yeah, things were going great for him, but he needed that to help him stay humble. He needed that routine to help him be energized to do the work that he was appointed to do, because it was God that elevated him in this foreign land into these high positions, and he needed it in order to maintain his integrity and his purity. And this was common not just for Daniel. It was a pretty common routine across all of the Hebrews who were there. I don't know that every single one of them did exactly like Daniel, but people would open their windows towards Jerusalem, and they would pray that one day God would deliver them, that one day He would allow them to go back to their homeland. And there were people all across Babylon that were praying, God, restore us back to where we were. They had been taken captive because of their rejection, because of their idolatry, and over again. So many wicked kings that God allowed them to be taken into exile. So during that time, they're praying, Lord, deliver us, send us back home. It would take decades before it would happen. But eventually, God would hear and answer their prayer. Ezra would go back. He would rebuild the temple. Nehemiah would go back. He would rebuild the walls. And God began to answer their prayer over these times. But they didn't. This is at the early part of it. So they are praying fervently, and that they would be able to rebuild their city and their temple, trusting that God would return them to their promised land. Things weren't looking good when they're in exile, but they were still praying for God to come through for them. So Daniel did what he did every day. And it's a lot like what David, when he wrote in Psalm 55:17, evening, morning, and at noon, I will complain and murmur, and the Lord will hear my voice. Man, I'm thankful for that. Because there's times, transparency here. There are times that I come to God and I am so energized and I am praying with fervency for other people, and I am just really going to standing in the gap for but that ain't every time. There's times I feel like David did here, and I can picture Daniel feeling that way at times too, because Lord, I'm just here complaining for a while, and guess what? God is perfect. He has heard everything. He can handle your complaint. Oh, I can't complain to God. He'll get mad and strike me dead. No, that's not what we're talking about here. You can complain to God, and what happens is the more you spend time with Him, the more you'll realize, and this happened to me this morning, actually. I was praying in my office. I wasn't complaining. I was just praying about a few things specifically. And God, what He did for me, what He'll do for you, is He dropped in my spirit all the things that He has already done for me. I mean, like I said, it wasn't complaining. I was actually praying for a few specific instances, and He dropped in my mind in that moment, don't you remember when I did this? Don't you remember when I did that? Hey, look at this situation right here. And as that began to come into my mind, my prayer for these other situations began to change. And while I was casting those things before Him, I began to turn it into a time of thanks and a time of worship and honor, because He just constantly was reminding me of how good He's already been to me. So you can do it, and it'll grow your faith. Go to the Lord. Lay your burdens down. Continue. Do this on a routine. Get into the habit. Go, go, go. And these people, they ended up believing it. They knew that there was something that they needed in their lives. They knew that they needed the spiritual routine. Daniel knew if he had compromised, and if you're going to compromise, you're likely going to compromise for something that you're facing death. I don't really want to compromise, but maybe if I just close my window so they don't see. I'll continue to pray, but they don't see me pray, and I'll pray in silence. I'll pray, when I'm driving down the road in my head. Nobody else knows I'm praying. You can pray, and nobody else know you're praying. If that's when you can pray, pray that way. But develop a routine somewhere that you're not ashamed. He knew that they would see him. He knew that they had set that up specifically to trap him. And here's some good news, and it's not necessarily the good news, but it's still good news. When you get distracted, or when the enemy comes at you harder than before, you can be encouraged, because if the enemy wasn't interested in you, he'd leave you alone. If he didn't want to derail you, he'd leave you alone. So when your past comes calling you back, you know you're on the right track. When the temptation that you used you move beyond that temptation, you move beyond that thing in your past, but when that begins to rear its head again, and that temptation circles back around, and there's a lot of things that are going on, and you're like, man, why am I struggling with this again? It could be because you're on the right track. And we faced an onslaught of the enemy lately. Personally, I feel like the Apostle Paul when he said this in 2 Corinthians 12:10. Therefore, I am well content with weakness, with insults, with distresses, with persecutions, with difficulties, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. When I am weak, then I am strong. And it ain't my strength. It's His strength. His strength is made perfect in my weakness. There's different leadership models and things to do. Some leadership models, not very successful ones, say that you need to surround yourself with people who are strong in the areas where you're strong and be really good at that thing. Other leadership models say surround yourself with people who are good at things that you're not good at, so more you're able to better accomplish. Here's what I see. I see where I'm weak, I want God to be strong. I want to surround myself with people who are strong in areas where I'm weak. But I want God to be exalted in my weakness. I want for people to look and go, him? Yeah, because it ain't me. It's God. Spiritual disciplines are the routines that God uses in us. So Daniel gets thrown in the lion's den. Darius is worried all night long because he really had an eye for Daniel. It was his friend. He couldn't go back on his word, so he had a rough night. And there's no text that tells us exactly what happened in the lion's den. It doesn't say that he laid down and was petting them like big kitties. I like to picture it that way. All it tells us is that God sent angels to shut the lions' mouths. And you won't find this in Scripture, but I fully believe that when Daniel was thrown in, that he maintained his spiritual discipline. that he immediately began to pray. There's a picture from 1615, a painting that depicts this. Daniel praying, surrounded by lions that could tear him apart at any minute. Now, the accuracy of it is Daniel would have been about 70 years old during this time, and this man is a lot younger. But the point of it is that Daniel, immediately when he was faced with his life, his spiritual routines kicked in like muscle memory. He was faced with a trial that could have ended his life, but he knew it, and he prayed anyway. They caught him, and he prayed anyway. In the middle of his trouble, he prayed, and God responded. The next morning, you can come, Daryl. The next morning, Darius comes to the door, and he calls out for Daniel. And the fact that he calls out for Daniel kind of shows his faith, that he had a little bit of faith in that God would deliver him. In fact, it said that your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself deliver you. That's what the king said right before Daniel was thrown in there. You serve this God, he'll deliver you. When spiritual disciplines enable you to withstand the trials of life, it begins to affect other people who don't believe. That's part of the beauty of the witness of what's going on. This is an example here. Darius was a Mede. He was not a Hebrew. He was not raised in that culture, yet he saw God's favor on Daniel's life. And the more and more, no matter what he faced, even facing death, Daniel stuck to his spiritual discipline. He stuck to his routine, and that caused Darius to begin to believe. Verse 20. When he had come near the den to Daniel, he cried out with a troubled voice. The king spoke and said to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you constantly serve, been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel spoke to the king, O king, live forever. And I love that he uses similar verbiage to what the enemies used to the king against him. They came appealing to the king's vanity. They came appealing to the king's authority, trying to get Daniel caught. Daniel comes appealing to the king's friendship. O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him. And also before you, O king, I have done no harm. King, I'm good, because I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything wrong against God. I didn't do anything wrong against you, and I'm good down here. Then the king, verse 23, was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found in him, because he had trusted God. Here's my closing challenge for you today. Don't wait until you're in the lion's den to suddenly develop a routine. Don't wait until you're facing certain death to say, oh, man, I really should have started this on Sunday when Pastor told me. I really should have started this 25 years ago, but I'm a creature of habit, and it's hard for an old dog to learn new tricks, whatever. No. Because you can't pray effectively in the lion's den until you've prayed faithfully in the living room. A man who never prays is going to call to God in the middle of trouble. But there's a difference between that and praying the prayer of faith. When you have that discipline, when you have that routine, when you are going to God multiple times a day, when you are taking your petitions to Him, and you're in such a prayer routine that you and God are just, you're on the same wavelength. The Bible talks about in Acts, when they were in the upper room, they were praying, seeking the outpouring of the Spirit, that they were all in one mind and in one accord. When you lock into the heart and the mind of God and you begin to pray to Him, your faith becomes strengthened, so that when those times come, that's the prayer of faith. It's not the prayer of rescue, it's a prayer of faith. God, I know you can do this. I've seen you do this, and I need you in this moment right now. But you can't pray the prayer of faith in the lion's den until you've been faithful in your routine. Daniel prayed 3 times a day facing Jerusalem. I'm not saying that you need to find a window and face towards the east, towards Jerusalem. If that helps you do it, but develop the routine. and enhance your routine. Pray, get into the presence of God, because spiritual disciplines are what prepare you for lion's den moments. And praying in the lion's den, those moments are what lead to revival. Will you stand? As I begin to pray today, if you have need, this altar is open. And we prayed for needs earlier, but I didn't invite anyone down. I'm doing that now. If you want something specific about your routine, if you need to develop a new routine and you want it to begin today, you want to come down to the front of this church, and there are steps down here that can serve as an altar. You could stand off to the side and just face towards heaven, hands up, and that be your routine, whatever it may be, and you want to begin that routine. Now is the opportunity for you. If you have some other need that's completely unrelated to anything I've talked about today, I can pray with you. We can anoint you with oil and pray the prayer of faith and lay hands on you. And God is still in the miracle business. He is still working and moving in the lives of His people. And that's my prayer for you this morning. Then as I begin to pray, you can come. If you're online and you need prayer, you can type it in the chat box, and we will review that and make sure that we are praying for any need that you have as well. You're not left out. You're part of what God is doing as well. So as we do that, and the purpose of all this is because, like I said, overarching theme of this next few weeks that I'm speaking is I want us to seek revival in here, and then it spill over families, church, community, world. I want to see God's revival fire move through His people and do a work that just turns the world upside down.